The New Testament lesson comes from the Gospel of John, chapter 11, verses 1 through 45. This is another very long reading, but let us listen for the word of God. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." But when Jesus heard it, he said, "This illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to his disciples, "Let us go to Judea again." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you, and are you going there again?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble, because they see the light of this world. But those who walk at night stumble, because the light is not in them." Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now, when Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench, because he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. He cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believed in him. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, both of the stories we have today deal with the idea of resurrection, of coming back to life. Literally, in John, Lazarus is brought back to life. And there's a lot of interesting things going on here. First off, it's interesting that Mary and Martha and many of the Jewish people at that time already believe in resurrection. They already believe at the end of time, people will be resurrected and we'll all be together with God. That's not what Jesus was talking about. It's kind of interesting. Jesus asked Martha, do you believe your brother can live again? And she says, yeah, at the end of time, sure it can. And a lot of times our beliefs are like that. There's at a safe distance, at a safe time, we say, yeah, anything can happen. But right now, we doubt anything great is going to happen. And Jesus is saying, no, what I'm asking you is, do you believe that right now something amazing can happen? And that's, I think, an important key to life is believing that we don't have to wait until some amazing future, when we're out of college, or when we have the right job, or when we're married and have kids, whatever you're waiting for, when you retire, whatever goalpost you have out there, that's years and years away. Jesus is telling Martha and Mary, right now, we can work a miracle if you're ready for it. And that's an important message to hear, that right now, amazing things can happen. It's not just a far away promise of something good, of an eternal life out there sometime. It's right now. And that's kind of the amazing thing about this story, is that no one expected it. Everyone around Jesus has faith. They all have been born and bred in the faith and raised in the faith. But no one expects the good thing to happen today. That's kind of what good is faith. I think Jesus is saying, if you're not using it every day, it's not something to save for the end of life. It's important now. So we're facing a big crisis, this coronavirus. It's threatening us in a lot of ways, two important ways. Number one, it's a very deadly virus, much more deadly than we're used to. And health experts are warning Americans, you guys don't know what's about to happen. You haven't faced anything this serious in your lifetime. So they're warning us, be ready. And that's number one. The big threat to us right now is a very deadly virus. The second thing, though, is as we try to slow down the virus, try to stop it wherever we can, we're practicing social distancing. And part of the consequences of social distancing is that the economy slows down and people are losing their jobs. Not as serious losing your job as it is dying from a virus, but don't discount how big an impact it's going to have on our society. Possibly millions of people, temporary or possibly longer than just a little while, losing their jobs is going to have a big effect on us. I'm totally confident the U.S. economy is going to bounce back. I don't know if it'll be months, might be a year or two. I'm totally confident the big economy, most of us will be back on sure economic footing before very long. But I don't want to forget about the people who are going to be left behind, the hourly workers who are right now without work and worried about their future. When I was 29 years old, I'd been an engineer for about 6 years. I was working for a company. Our job was monitoring the Soviet Union, making sure that they didn't have anything that would surprise us, and kind of keeping up with our technology so nothing they could do would surprise the United States. And I'm totally confident that in the Soviet Union, they had engineers just like me monitoring our technology so that we couldn't surprise them. And I felt pretty good that what we were doing is keeping the world safe. As long as we couldn't surprise each other, nothing surprising was going to happen. Well, 29 years old, when the Soviet Union fell, the Soviet Union collapsed, they were no longer the big enemy. And the U.S. Congress decided, well, we don't have to spend a lot of money defending against them anymore. And so I lost my job. I was laid off. And it was a traumatic experience. I was married, I had 4 kids, and to not have a job, not being able to provide for my family was so painful. It was so humiliating. Sonia had a good job, so we were okay as a family. We were luckier than a lot of families today. We had an income, but it was so painful for me to not be able to hold a job and provide for my family and kids. I didn't want to go out to the grocery store. I figured, go to the grocery store during the week when nobody's there. But I didn't want to do that because I was afraid people would know I didn't have a job. It was so painful. And I'm thinking right now of how many Americans are going through that kind of process, trying to decide, how do we keep our house? How do we pay the rent? What happens if we can't pay the rent? How do we pay our bills? What happens if we go too far into debt? There's going to be a lot of fallout from what's happening right now. A lot of people who are going to need more care than we're used to giving. It's my nephew is a restaurant manager up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So far, he's had to lay off 100 employees. And he's found that so painful that 100 families out there that were depending on his business. And now he knows that they're not having an income because of things he can't control. And it's happening all over the United States. And what's going to happen is, our government isn't really friendly to people who are hourly workers. They don't seem to care a whole lot about these people who are living paycheck to paycheck, just barely getting by. Once we get through this virus, as a society, we're going to have to learn how to work as a team better than we ever had before. We're going to have a lot more people who need help recovering, who need help getting back into their homes, whose children have been disrupted, moving from school district to school district because of unstable housing, of people who have debt and have bad credit scores and all kinds of things that go together with debt because they've lost their jobs. It's going to be a big problem we have to face. We're going to have to be better at being a team than we have been in the past. People like the church. All the things we did before this crisis, we're going to have a lot more people to take care of afterwards. But we can do it. Yeah, that's what Jesus is saying. It sounds hard, it sounds difficult. We had a hard time before this crisis taking care of all the people who need economic help. And we look to the future and say, we can't deal with a lot more people. What we're saying is exactly what Mary and Martha were saying, is that, we can't do a miracle. That's not going to happen in America. It's not the way America works. But the answer Jesus tells us is no. We can do a new thing. We can work with these families and get them the help they need. I had a good friend when I was at Canyon Lake. He had been a church member in Pittsburgh during the big 1980 recession, and all the steel mills closed. And they were trying to figure out, how do we help all these families? And they had the great idea to actually talk to these families and find out what they needed. And a lot of these people who had great jobs in steel mills, good salaries, who now had very little salaries at all, what they wanted for their families was, they didn't want to hand out, there's a lot of things you might assume they wanted. They wanted health care. And so the Presbyterian churches in Pittsburgh got together and formed a group health care plan for former steel workers who no longer had jobs. And they made them a group and got them affordable health care while they were putting their lives back together. So we can do amazing things for people in crisis if we believe the miracle can happen. A few years ago, there was a PBS special about a man who had suffered a stroke. And the question was, can the brain rebuild its neural pathways? And these scientists were saying, yes, we've found evidence that the brain really can, even as an adult, rebuild itself. And so they had this man whose right hand didn't work anymore because of a stroke. And so they told him, we have evidence that the brain can rebuild itself. And we want you to work really hard on this hand, and we're going to monitor your brain, we're going to give you exercises every day. Do this, and we think you can bring back some motion in your hand. So they put a big mitt on his left hand, so he couldn't use his left hand. For hours every day, in such a frustrating situation, he had to try to use his useless right hand. And he worked, and he worked, and he worked, and it was frustrating, and it was difficult, but slowly, very slowly, he started getting some movement back in his hand, some control back in that hand. And as they were doing brain scans every day, that dead part of his brain started showing life again. So they were demonstrating that adults really can build some neural pathways as an adult. By the end of the program, he had some pretty good use of his right hand, which he had not had at the beginning of the program. But the important thing about this was, to me, is that he would not have done all of that difficult work had a scientist not told him, we believe you can use your hand again. Because everyone before those scientists had told him, probably not. Neural pathways don't regenerate as an adult. You're going to have to get used to life without your right hand. So with that kind of thinking, he never did that arduous work of rebuilding those neural pathways. But once he believed it was possible, the miracle happened. The miracle of modern science, the miracle of the human body, but he had to believe the miracle would happen. And we need miracles every day of our life to get out of bed, to do the difficult tasks that are before us, to make a better society for everybody. We have to believe the miracles could happen. Finally, Ezekiel. Ezekiel's facing the destruction of his entire nation, and he has this vision, a dream, where he envisions his people as a valley of dry bones. They're not just dead, they've been dead for a long time. And God comes up to Ezekiel. God says, here's your nation of Israel. They're dead. They've been dead for a long time. They're dry bones. Can these people live? The same question Jesus asked Mary and Martha hundreds of years later. And Ezekiel, being a smart prophet, says, I don't know, God. You tell me if these bones can live. And God says, yes, they can. Watch this. And the bones come back to life, and it's a whole host of people. And that's symbolic of what God is doing with the nation of Israel. Even though they've been taken into slavery, even though they've lost everything, they've lost their land, they've lost their temple, they've lost their freedom, God is promising Ezekiel, I can take those dry bones and make a nation out of them again. So keep that in mind as we're facing this very scary reality of the coronavirus. What it can do to us individually, what it can do to our society over the long term. And even after we've gone through that economic recovery, there's still people who are going to be left behind. We don't have to leave them behind. If we believe, we can all move forward with a better life for everybody. But that's the key. You've got to believe the miracle can happen. So go out into the world and believe we'll get through this. Believe we'll get through this together. And then go make it happen. Amen.